I want to start this off by saying that I love The Mandalorian, flaws and all, and there are many. Its charm was in its simplicity and its lack of pretension. I bring this up because a lot of the problems present in Season 3 are to an extent present in Seasons 1 and 2, and it mostly comes down to either careless writing or possibly deliberately lazy and hoping you don't notice writing. An example of this being in episode 4 of season 1, where Kara and Din have to come up with a whole plan and training regime for the villagers when Din has a heavily armoured ship that could accomplish the same goal. And I know there's the whole teach a man to fish argument, but it's not being framed this way. And then similarly in episode 6 of season 3, where Mando and Bo have to catch a runaway droid and Din is inexplicably not wearing his jetpack. Why is this? So there can be a chase where Mando could believably not be able to catch the robot, though Bo, who kept her jetpack on, could. And this is why I'm leaning more towards possibly deliberately lazy and hoping you don't notice, because Mando has been wearing that jetpack for pretty much the entire season. They had to, with forethought, take it off him. And they don't even bother coming up with a lazy excuse as to why he doesn't have it. He just simply doesn't have it. And they don't address it because they're hoping you don't notice. There are countless examples like this, such as the laughable attempts at battling Crocoturtle, the stupidity of letting that one pirate go, the baffling logistics of the Ragnar rescue arc, the jetpacks being established to have limited fuel in one episode, but suddenly it's unlimited in another. Grogu conveniently forgetting he can use the Force until the writing needs him to. The Praetorian Guards being able to take down a Mandalorian, but when they have another Mandalorian on the ground, not only do they not take him out, but all three of them decide to follow the baby, leaving the Mandalorian relatively unharmed on the floor. But I won't be focusing on those individual little elements of stupidity. I want to focus on why, despite having some of the same problems, seasons 1 and 2 were still ultimately audience pleasers, whereas this season failed to accomplish the same thing. So I'm going to do this by looking at every episode as a whole, bringing up certain points, and then bringing them all together in the conclusion. You know, the way a TV show is supposed to do. Episode 1. This was just last time on The Mandalorian. I have no earthly idea what was going on behind the scenes at Lucasfilm to insert not only Mando into Book of Boba Fett, but the reuniting of him with Grogu. The thing about The Mandalorian is that despite its very clear writing problems, it had charm, simplicity, and heart. People clearly cared about this story. That's part of what made it so popular. And I see many fans who aren't tired of Star Wars say, well, you're just being unfair because you're not taking into consideration that they're building an extended universe. I say, yes, I'm very much taking that into consideration, just not in the same way you are. A big element of The Mandalorian's success was that it was Star Wars enough to appeal to fans, but detached enough from the wider universe that it could engage casual audiences. And I say this a lot, but fans tend to forget that casual audiences are the bulk of the audience. Most people aren't engaging with media the way you and I are right now. They watch it, they're entertained by it, they turn it off, they move on with their lives. So the writers knew that many viewers of Mando would be confused as to why Din and Grogu were in the positions they were in, so they just made this entire episode as an exercise in catch-up. And the fact that they got themselves in a position where they had to do that is bad enough, but it's not even a good catch-up. And just because writers explain something doesn't mean they've accomplished good writing. You can't just remember a dangling plot thread, explain it in a couple of sentences, and think you've done your job as a writer.
It's complicated. I completed my quest. He returned to me. I removed my helmet, and now I'm an apostate.
someone explains several life-changing events to you, your reaction or an audience's reaction isn't, okay, that makes sense. It's, how did this happen? Why did this happen? When did this happen? Tell me more! And it's not just casual fans this laziness fails, because if you look at the official Star Wars timeline book, Season 1, Season 2, and Book of Boba Fett all take place in 9 ABY. Jon Favreau said that Grogu was with Luke for between 0 and 2 years, so one of them is wrong, but whether it's one or the other, Navarro basically rebuilt itself in at best 2 years and at worst less than 1. I say again, an entire planet that was in this state when we first saw it turned itself into a thriving Outer Rim trade district in at best 2 years. And that's not the only thing in this season that makes the timeline not make sense, but again, we're not going to be focusing on individual little minutiae of stupidity, we're big picturing this. So yeah, just because they're creating an extended universe does not give them an excuse for this. There are ways to create extended universes, this ain't it. Getting yourself into a position where you have to dedicate an entire episode of your show to catch up is not good writing, universe building or no universe building. And again, it's not even a competent catch-up.
What about Marshal Doom?
After she brought in Moff Gideon, she was recruited by Special Forces.
Sentences spoken to explain certain things the audience may have missed is not a good way to catch them up. It doesn't resolve anything, it just brings up more questions. So if I were to sum up this episode, I would say it's not enough for people who don't keep up with the universe, and it's redundant for those who do. Episode 2. So this is where the show really starts, and originally I didn't mind this episode. I know a lot of people have said that Mando has video game storytelling, and while I understood that argument, I didn't necessarily agree, but in this episode, yeah, I really got the video game storytelling. Searching the area, defeating the mini-bosses, avoiding traps, the final boss. I think you could even have a little puzzle section of Grogu trying to work out how to free Mando. I really didn't mind it though. I thought the atmosphere was interesting. There was a decent amount of mystery as well as things being shown, so you could get an idea of what this once great civilization looked like and how it functioned without saying it outright. For a brief time, that doesn't last long.
This was once a beautiful civilization. Now it's a tomb. There's nothing left. A great society. Is now a memory.
These lines date back to the age of the first Mandalore. According to age, voting lines were once in there. Mandalore the Great is said to have changed in the Middle East. It is from these legends that this small symbol was adopted and became the symbol of our planet.
I think I like this episode far less in hindsight, considering I know now what they're doing when diminishing Din in favour of Bo. I didn't mind that the focus shifted to her because, again, I thought this was Din's redemption story and he was going to go on an internal quest with the specific goal of redeeming himself by the rules of the Creed, but find out more about his faith and being Mandalorian in all the forms it comes in along the way. You know, a spiritual journey? That was kind of where Season 2 and Book of Boba Fett left him, and what the trailer seemed to be implying.
What are we? What do we stand for?
Then again, the trailer also implied that Din was going to be the main character, so silly me, I guess. I didn't mind Bo getting focus here, because if Din was going to come to terms with his Mandalorian identity and spirituality and make peace with what it means to be Mandalorian, then hearing the beliefs and experiences of other Mandalorians is the perfect way to do that. Bo-Katan was the perfect foil for him on this journey. The journey that ends when this episode does. Episode 3. I have nothing to say about this episode. It's not even a Mandalorian episode. It's a backdoor pilot to whatever they're going to pull out of their arse next. And the only thing I get from the very clear, almost quaint effort it is putting in is the dying gasps of, "We're not Andor. No matter how hard we try, we'll never be Andor." Episode 4. The Foundling. I was still remaining optimistic at this point. You guys who have seen my Mando videos know that I am a big defender of the way as a story point. Because spiritual matters are not things that are portrayed either often or well. And when I say spiritual matters, I don't mean the existential philosophical questions. Now, Star Wars does that really, really well. And any writer and director who's looking to show off how smart he is also gives it a go. Results may vary. I mean the real practical implications of following a religious code, or even just following a code in general, especially one that is very strict and orthodox. I'll talk about that more when we get to episode 5, but I was optimistic because Bo-Katan was welcomed into the tribe, and the idea that after the life she's led as a Mandalorian leader that she could find peace and community in a place like the Covert was very interesting. The last episode was called The Convert. The idea that we were going to see not only how the tribe functions daily, but the way through a convert's eyes had me really interested. And from where her character was in season 3, it was a very natural yet unexpected place to take her character. And I wasn't even mad about this episode censoring her again, because the idea of her opening up and not being so rigid about her view of what it means to be Mandalorian would tie into Din's journey and him doing the same. You know, the journey I was still convincing myself was going to happen. I am well aware that expectations can lead you to judging a story by what it's not rather than what it is, but I will prove to you that is not what I'm doing when we get into talking more about this whole retaking Mandalore mess. Plus, you can't blame your audience for having expectations when those are the expectations you set up and advertised. So yeah, silly me for thinking that Din Djarin was going to be the main character of The Mandalorian. That's what ruined this show. My expectations. I just had the wrong expectations. Anyway, the interesting parts of this episode were Bo living among the tribe, but anything else I have to say is just every little piece of stupidity that happens here. And I promised I wasn't going to do that, but just for fun, let's have a little speed round of how many things I can remember off the top of my head from this episode. So this part is totally unscripted. Get ready, guys. This is going to be fun. Well, first I think in the opening section there was Mandalorians doing target practice over a stretch of water. So, and that's why I say target practice. What freaking target? And not only that, there were Mandalorians practicing their jetpack maneuvers over the target area, and then that whole spar with Ragnar. Like, I'm really gonna go back for Ragnar here, because he was put in a really embarrassing and impossible situation there. Because Grogu may be a magic Jedi baby, but he is still a baby. So I think that's actually why Ragnar chose darts to begin with, because he didn't want to fight a literal baby. Because there is absolutely no way you come out of that looking good. You get beat up, and you are the guy who gets beaten up by a baby. Whereas if you win, well, congratulations, you fucking monster. You beat up a baby. And the rules surrounding the darts, fire them in every order?
You may fire the darts in any order.
So why didn't Ragnar just fire 3 of them? Why wouldn't any person playing this game or doing this spar fire all 3 at the same time? There is no reason not to. Like, unless your opponent moves and you miss. I guess that's something about it. So again, I think Ragnar was probably trying to be nice. He didn't want to just knock out the baby in one go. So yeah, that was really crappy of Din to just put that kid in that situation. So let's move on to the big guns, the Ragnar rescue arc. So the kid gets taken by this big dinosaur bird thing. They say it always gets away, implying that more of their children have been taken by this creature and they have done nothing about it. There's problem 1. And then Bo follows it in its ship to its nest, and instead of doing anything with her ship, decides to come back. They do a little plan, and then they go to the nest and they decide to spend the night with, when they're actually expecting, in the script, they're expecting Ragnar to be alive. Why is there no urgency here? And then, of course, there's the inexplicable reason that Ragnar is actually alive in the stomach. Okay, I'm going to make this better. I'm going to make this better right now. This might have worked if Ragnar was the first child that this creature took, and they think he is dead, and they go on a slight revenge mission kind of, but also to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and we can actually explore Paz, like, as a father. Like, we can see his grief at thinking his child has been killed, and then maybe if he does do something stupid, it's a little bit more understandable rather than him not just waiting for the signal when he's been completely calm and collected this entire time. Then it actually makes sense for their lack of immediate urgency. And then what you can do to make sure Ragnar being alive still makes sense is you can have the bird cough up other live animals, because you think about it, one teeny little Mandalorian child is not going to feed all of those babies, so that would kind of imply that Mama went grocery shopping before she came back to feed the babies. So you can cough up a couple of animals, they're alive, the babies eat them, then they cough up Ragnar, and everyone's like, oh my god, Ragnar's alive, oh my god, this is brilliant, and then they rush in to save him. Okay, that's not perfect, but it at least makes a little bit more sense for... And that is why we are not talking about the individual elements of stupidity in this show, because if we did, we would be here for hours.
Episode 5. Okay, one more. Pretty irresponsible of you to take your infant child into an air battle when you clearly have people to leave him with, but... No, we're done. We're done. Okay. Time for me to talk about the way. I'm going to be repeating myself from a couple of other Mando videos, so apologies for that, but I have always been a big defender of the way as a story point. I think a lot of people who criticize it are really saying nothing more than, it's dumb, it's impractical, it doesn't make sense, how do they shave? When what they're failing to understand is that religious rituals and practices are not based in practicality, at least not in the same way the other things in our lives are. So I'm just going to skip this whole episode and head straight to the ending scene where the Armorer, essentially the priestess of this religion, says to Bo-Katan,
"Remove your helmet."
I was talking to a non-geek friend of mine about this show, and even she, who hasn't seen it, said when I told her this, "What?" Just imagine that with a Danish accent. This is where the show lost me. I think for good. The way means nothing now. I know it's hard to place oneself in the mindset of a faithful person if you're not one yourself. I'm the kind of person who needs to see, hear, feel, touch, and understand things to believe in them. And I want to stress that I do not believe that makes me a better or smarter person in any way. It's simply the way I am. I just don't have the capacity within me to be a person of faith. But that doesn't mean I can't try to understand people who are. And the Mandalorians becoming this strict and dogmatic about their religion after the loss of their homeworld and the majority of their people is a very human thing that often happens in our world. People who are forced to flee their homes, who may have been moderate in following their practices before, sometimes tend to become more serious and strict about this because their faith, their stories, and their culture are the only thing they could take with them when they fled. It's clearly laid out in Book of Boba Fett that the Armorer and likely all the Mandos of this tribe believe that their adherence to the way is what saved them.
Had our sect not been cloistered on the moon of Concordia, we would have not survived the Great Purge.
And another thing that has been laid out since episode 4 of season 1 is the belief that if you take off your helmet, you are no longer Mandalorian. And now that we've reminded ourselves of the narrative and thematic rules, let's see how the writers trample all over them in a way that doesn't even adhere to basic logic, let alone emotional logic. Or for that matter, the logic of the universe.
Our people have strayed from the way, but it is not enough for a few to walk it. We must walk the way together. All Mandalorians. I was taught that the mythosaur existed only in legends. And yet, you saw it.
It is a sign that the next age is upon us.
You have walked both worlds. You are the one who can unite us.
So what she's saying here is that the sighting of the mythosaur foretells the next age of Mandalore and the reunification of the Mandalorian people. And Bo has walked both worlds. Can take off her helmet and be accepted by the Creed. There are many problems with this, but let's go over the 3 major ones. Number 1. This doesn't even make basic logical sense. Think about what she said. Bo-Katan saw the mythosaur equals mythosaur means next age is coming equals Bo can reunite the Mandalorian people equals Bo can take off her helmet. Okay, if I stretch myself, the barest thread of logic exists there in that Bo-Katan is far more likely to get disparate Mandalorian people on side if she's not following a very strict, obscure code of Mandalorian orthodoxy. But this is clearly a case of hand of the author rather than what the characters would actually believe. This doesn't make sense coming from the Armorer because she believes, and all the Mandalorians of her tribe believe, that removing your helmet means you are no longer Mandalorian. So the Armorer, who doesn't consider anyone Mandalorian, armor or no armor, if they don't follow this rule, suddenly says,
We must walk the way together. All Mandalorians.
What the hell do you mean, all Mandalorians?
You have removed your helmet. You are no longer Mandalorian.
They have come up with the sighting of the mythosaur as an excuse for the Armorer to simply change her mind. First of all, religious people don't just change their minds like this. They don't just say, well, this woman is probably going to get more people on side if she's not abiding by our code, so I guess applying it so strictly is not that important. No, that's not how religious belief works. Religions do evolve slowly over time to fit the ages. Very slowly. And the only reference point I really have from my own experience is Catholicism, because if you look back to Renaissance times, or especially medieval times, there were very strict rules about what you could eat and when you could eat it. But those rules slowly just devolved over time to the point where even when my parents were young, there was a rule that you couldn't eat meat on Fridays, so instead you had fish. And at least in this country, fish on a Friday became known as Catholic steak. But again, the rule just devolved and devolved. I remember my granny telling me one time my granddad came home and asked, what's for dinner? And she said, Catholic steak. And he said, oh, fuck it. I'm going out for sausages. And she said, you will not go out for sausages. And he said, yes, I don't care. I don't care. I want sausages. I'm going out for sausages. So it just got to the point where the rule didn't serve any purpose anymore until I think just before I was born, the Pope just abolished it as a rule altogether. Jesus didn't come to the Pope in a vision and say, yeah, pescatarianism is great and all, but, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. And even that's a bit too direct. It's as if the Pope just saw Jesus and suddenly thought, yes, this sighting of our Saviour just means that, the fish on a Friday rule shouldn't apply anymore. The sighting of the mythosaur is no reason for her to throw away a key component of her religion, and beyond that, why would she even come to this conclusion in the first place? Again, hand of the author at work here, when she believes that Mandalorians who follow the creed are the only Mandalorians. That's what she believes.
You are no longer Mandalorian.
Until she suddenly doesn't anymore.
All Mandalorians.
Anyone who has the capacity to step out of their own mindset for 2 seconds knows that this is not how religious people think. They don't just believe in a set of values and practices and then for no reason at all, because, again, the reason they gave is the author's reason, not the characters. They don't just say, all Mandalorians, we must walk the way together. Even though part of walking the way means wearing your helmet, we can all walk the way together. Helmet or no helmet, it doesn't matter. 2. Carrying on from that point, why does the Armorer even believe Bo-Katan to begin with? I had this great comment on the last video I made regarding this topic that says something along the lines of, imagine you were a Christian priest and a guy who was an atheist 2 days ago comes to you and says, I just had bread and wine with Jesus, for real, guys. Again, hand of the author. We know she's telling the truth, so the Armorer must believe it as well. 3. Carrying on again. She said to Bo that she should be the leader, when previously she was saying,
Bo-Katan is a cautionary tale. She once laid claim to rule Mandalore based purely on blood and the sword you now possess. Her rule ended in tragedy.
Why does the Arbiter have any reason to change her mind about Bo-Katan? A couple of successful missions? What has changed here? So the Arbiter says,
but it was gifted to her and not won by creed.
And now she's just gifting her leadership. And we'll get to the bloody darksaber. Oh boy, will we. Now, I was going to get into this even further, but I found I was just repeating verbatim what I'd said in my previous Mandalorian video, and I knew, I said in that video I should have just waited until the season was finished, but I just couldn't help myself. So, apologies to those of you who have seen it before. Here's the time code to skip to if you want, but here it is. Din, who was raised in this creed, tells Bo the first time he meets her,
Do not cover your face. You are not Mandalorian.
And the Arbiter says to Din,
You are a Mandalorian no more.
And repeats to Din,
You have removed your helmet.
You are no longer Mandalorian.
And now Bo-Katan can remove her helmet, and not only are they cool with that, they see it as the thing that should be done. This is something you were willing to exile a lifelong loyal member of your tribe for. Not only that, he removed his helmet to save a foundling, protecting which is something also sacred to your creed.
You have done the highest honor of the creed, saving a foundling.
Hold up.
You are no longer Mandalorian.
Not only that, Din had the freaking darksaber, the significance of which the writers have so far been ignoring. Another very sacred symbol of your people and its leadership. You were so convinced, and I sympathize with why, that complete adherence to the way is what saved your people, and you were willing to do that. I have no argument against that as a story point, because tragically in real life, that happens. Now, I'm not talking about religious people, I'm talking about dogmatic people. Of course, religion and dogmatism do often make compatible bedfellows, but they can be mutually exclusive. There are people out there who do think like this. Now, not only do you believe there is another way, not only do you believe it's acceptable to adhere to this other way, but you believe that it's possible to adhere to both. No, that's not how this works. That's not how people work. You cannot have your helmet and eat it too. And just to show you what I mean about dogmatic people and give you an example of Star Wars doing this very well is the aptly named Clone Trooper Dogma. For those of you who haven't seen the show, a clone battalion, which ordinarily belongs to Anakin, is being headed by another Jedi, one who has a very high casualty rate. The main clone of the show, Captain Rex, is put in the difficult position of following the orders of a superior when he knows they're ill-advised and put his men in unnecessary danger. It is important to note that the clones are not only raised but bred to be obedient. Their entire lives have been pushing them towards this mindset. But some individualistic clones like ARC Trooper 5s do emerge and know instinctually how wrong this is. Then you get people like Dogma, whose entire life is surrounding how he was raised to think and behave, and if you look at it from his point of view, you can really understand. He was basically bred to be fed to an unfeeling war machine, and everyone he grew up with and cares about was bred for the same purpose. He has to believe the system is just, because if he doesn't, 1, his brothers are dying for nothing, and 2, what the hell is he even here for? Jedi Master Krell, wannabe Sith by the way, throws him and his brothers into unnecessary dangerous battles. He still follows the rules. People argue against his methods with facts. That doesn't matter. The rules are in place for a reason, so we have to follow. Krell rejects a perfectly good plan to minimize casualties and win the battle. He must have had a reason. The clones do it anyway and succeed. They were wrong to do it because they went against the rules. His brothers are to be executed despite saving lives, winning, and achieving the objective. No, they must deserve it because them's the rules. It is only when he basically has the prophet, shall we say, the conveyor of the rules, tell him point blank that he duped him, was using him, and none of this even fucking matters. Only then does his dogmatism crack. This is perfect. Here, the reason we have for the Armourer deciding that not only is there another way to do things, but that other way is a good thing to have, I know what they are trying to do here. The Covert are a small group who don't accept outsiders, which includes any Mandalorian who takes off their helmet, making them instantly not Mandalorian in their eyes. Any alliance between them and other Mandalorians is going to be fraught with tension because you've got one side believing the others aren't Mandalorian, and the other side thinking the people sitting across from them are creepy cultish extremists, which... fair. Which is actually an interesting problem to resolve. Narrative tension, political strife, something Star Wars is generally quite good at. But instead of trying to right away this dogmatism can be eased, that their prejudice against scandalously nakedly faced Mandalorians could be overcome, you just say, she saw a mythosaur, knew coming, Bo, you've lived without your helmet and you've lived with it for a brief time, now you can do both. Not only does that make no sense, not only is it lazy, it is the worst kind of laziness because it wastes so much potential. It gets you out of a writing situation that not only should you have wrote your way out of, but it should have been the focus. Again, you have a group of Mandalorians who believe that removing your helmet makes you not Mandalorian. If the goal of your story is to reunite Mandalore, this is a conflict you are going to have to write your way out of. How do you do that? You faff around for most of the season as if you don't only have 8 episodes to tell your story. Then, she saw a mythosaur. How did the Clone Wars manage to write its way both in and out of this scenario in 22 minutes when you can't even think of a lazy excuse that makes sense? Because if you want to think about this even more, and I know, fun, I understand that the sighting of the mythosaur was a foretold, even holy event. That gives the Armourer no reason to believe that removing the helmet is okay now. In fact, Bo-Katan was bathing in the sacred waters when she saw the mythosaur and hasn't removed her helmet since. If anything, this would be reason for the Armourer to further believe that the way is right. Episode 6. If the ongoing season throughline was not reclaiming freaking Mandalore, maybe a cute episodic show of Din and Bo bounty hunting or solving mysteries together would have been kind of cute. I know a lot of people weren't going to like episode 6, and I didn't either, but I feel like in another reality I could have done. The Mandalorian's episodic storytelling was what I loved about it. It was so easy and relaxing to just harken back to a way of television that isn't really utilised anymore. In Season 1, you had the season throughline, Protect the Child. Season 2's throughline, Find a Jedi, and the entire series throughline was the looming threat of Moff Gideon. But because it's a big galaxy, all Mando and Grogu had to do, as long as the Empire wasn't nipping at their heels, was keep sharp and keep moving, which allowed for fun, cute, yet action-packed episodic adventures that you didn't really need to watch the whole series to follow and fully enjoy in isolation, because the threat of Gideon wasn't so immediate and the season through lines were small in scale enough that it felt like you could take your time with the show. We could have goofy, campy adventures with weird characters we'd never seen before and may never see again, and if you don't like one episode, then there's another different adventure right around the corner. So you could watch it and get as invested as you wanted. Whereas the season throughline here is reunite your people and rebuild your planet. When you have a throughline that has that much weight, it feels frivolous to go and play Law and Order Plaisir. And that is one of the primary problems of this season. The episodic elements of The Mandalorian and the season through lines are not being integrated well, and they're even trying to integrate them with other Star Wars shows. This is not The Mandalorian. This is Mandalorian, a Star Wars story. The only real plot point for the overarching story in this episode is picking up the other Mandalorians and the darksaber. This is another case of just because you explain it doesn't mean it's good.
While exploring Mandalore, I was captured, and this blade was taken from me. Bo-Katan rescued me and slayed my captor. She defeated the enemy that defeated me.
This is a sacred weapon venerated by a warrior culture that symbolizes leadership won in ritual combat, and Bo gets it on a technicality. I cannot overstate how underwhelming this was, and how much it misses the point of ritual combat, as bad a method for choosing a leader as that is. It's a clear case of going by the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. Once again, that might have been interesting to explore what it actually means to be worthy of the darksaber, but the way this is framed, the way Din speaks in this heavy tone as if he's conveying something weighty, the reactions of the other Mandos, and Bo's check me out stance means that they were clearly trying to make this a moment of true significance, and the technicality was good enough. And once again, hand of the author, as all the Mandalorians just instantly believe them. You could say that due to the ending of Season 3, they are deliberately trying to diminish the importance of the darksaber, but we'll talk about that when we reach the finale. But listen to Din's tone.
Would this blade then not belong to her?
Look at this shot. Tell me this isn't being framed as a great reclaiming of the saber by its rightful owner on a technicality.
She defeated the enemy that defeated me.
I cannot overstate how underwhelming this was. Call this a personal gripe if you want, but I don't think it is.
One, I might add, who has not one drop of Mandalorian blood in his veins.
This really pissed me off. If you know anything about the Mandalorians, you know that adoption is incredibly prevalent in their society. There are even adoption vows we can refer to. And I'm sick of this simplification of the Mandalorians as just cool warriors, because cool warriors, yes, but there is no just about it. If we look at legends, the original Mandalorians weren't human, they were Tong, and they did as warrior societies do. They went around the galaxy conquering and enslaving people, and one of the races they enslaved were humans, because humans were the most populous race in the galaxy. But they had this system where you could rise from slave class to warrior class, and it wasn't just humans they conquered and or took in. It was many, many races. And eventually the Tongs died out and the humans kind of took over as the most prevalent race because, again, they were the most populous one. But they didn't just suddenly stop doing this because it is what made their society strong. But even if we're not taking legends into consideration or just picking and discarding certain things from legends, why change this? Because if you look at warrior societies in our own history, yes, they are hierarchical, and yes, people did care about blood, but they were far more pragmatic when it came to matters of strength. If you could fight, you were in the club. And it makes even more sense for the Mandalorians because of how fast they grow and how strong they are, and especially because their women are warriors too. And despite what some cringeworthy comics have tried to tell us recently, when you're pregnant, you can't do shit. Your body is busy. And what self-respecting warrior wants to spend 9 months cooking a bun in the oven when they've got all these lovely wars to fight? And when you've got all these wars to fight, you've got all these war orphans to adopt. Ain't that lucky? Think about how impractical it is to rely on blood to build your society. The only reason we do that in our society is because we worked on a system of primogeniture, which is basically the inheritance system we recognise today. But not all cultures did that, and even if they did, they didn't always do that. To take an example from Scottish history is Macbeth. Yes, he was a real person, and yes, he did kill King Duncan and take the throne in favour of Duncan's son Malcolm, but he killed Duncan in battle, and they worked on a system where if you could trace your paternal line back to Kenneth MacAlpine, who's often credited as being the first true king of Scotland, you were entitled to vie for the throne. And the reason this system fell out of favour is because, as you can imagine, it caused a whole hell of a lot of civil wars. So primogeniture became the much more accepted system, because if someone is entitled to something from birth, well, there's bugger all you can do about it, I suppose. But the covert do go by the old Foundling system, and they are stated to go by the old ways. So it is clear that in canon, this canon they are building, that Mandalorians did used to do this. When and why did they stop? Because we stopped, because as I said, it caused a lot of civil wars, but Mandalorians aren't going to say, yeah, you know, this system of might is right, only the strongest shall rule, it's causing a lot of wars, maybe we should stop doing that. If you wanted conflict in this scene, Axe having a problem with Din's religion is enough.
A misguided zealot possesses the blade.
And if he doesn't consider him Mandalorian, why does he even care what his religion is? Really, the covert are the only Mandalorians who keep the traditions of adoption going. It's clear in the final episode that there are ceremonies for taking a foundling into one's clan, so the covert are the only ones who do this, and they are seen as really ultra-traditionalist zealots by the Mandalorians, who at some point in Mandalorian history stopped doing it for reasons that I cannot fathom. Now, I'm not saying that Mandalorians never have their own biological children, of course they do. It's just that, unlike in our society where sadly adoption is kind of a last resort for people, in a society that has these kind of priorities, it is one of the primary options. Because not only is genetics a lottery, but it takes an indeterminate amount of time to get pregnant, depending on the couple, 9 months to grow the baby, and even in a society like the Mandalorians where they have an unreasonably low age of majority, 13 I believe, that is at minimum 13 years and 9 months of work. So in a society that prizes strength above all else, who has succeeded by allowing the strongest to rise to the top regardless of race, gender, or bloodline, when and why did this happen? It makes no sense for any Mandalorians other than the pacifists who wanted being Mandalorian to be a matter of birthplace rather than a way of life and shared culture to believe this. I hate that they did this. Not only because there is no reason for it, not only because it doesn't make sense, but they removed one of the most unique and admirable elements of an otherwise brutal culture. Well done. Episode 7. It seems like there's a huge dearth in quality between the episodes that actually matter to the whole grand plan of the SCU and the episodes that are trying to emulate what people loved about the show, which is namely fun episodic adventures. If you look at Mando seasons 1 and 2, you can see the effort in great shot composition. I don't know if that's due to Jon Favreau being excited to make use of new technology and ideas, whereas at this point he's checked out, or if there is some kind of push and pull going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. I know Jon said it was his decision to bring Grogu and Mando back together, but tell me the hands of the marketing gods weren't at play here. Shots in this season seem so flat and uninspired, and when they were trying to say something, it was just about how awesome and leaderly Bo is, which is a pretty simple thing to do visually, and they did it very simply. But in this episode, we get an over-the-shoulder tracking shot set to pounding music. Lots of things are out of focus, creating both a sense of mystery and a sense that what's going on here is quite dirty. And then we get to this, which seems incredibly simple, but is such a beautiful shot that achieves multiple things. It's intimate yet voyeuristic, again making us feel that This is a very secretive and even dangerous thing we shouldn't be caught watching, and it also makes us feel small in regards to what's going on. Seriously, this looks like it could be one of those beautiful concept art pictures we get at the end credits, because it tells us so much about what's going on without saying anything. And then we get this shot of Moff Gideon just walking down the hall with the red laser doors opening for him. This displays his power and menace with no words. Is it a bit on the nose? Yes, but it's on the nose in the very Star Wars way, especially when it comes to framing and color coding their villains. Obvious, but incredibly striking. Bo brings back the naked Mandalorians, and I'm just going to call them the naked Mandalorians. She brings them back to the covert, and they take off their helmets in front of the followers of the Way immediately. And at first, maybe a little part of me thinks we're going to get some of that narrative tension I was talking about, but...
Welcome, fellow Mandalorians.
As I said in episode 5, there is no reasonable explanation for the Armorer to be behaving like this. To have a not come to Jesus, but think Jesus is cool, but we can actually stand to invite some other people to the table moment. Realistically, her greeting should have more closely resembled this.
To hell with all you dirty heathen!
Grogu in the IG-12 mech suit. It's ridiculous. I just can't take it seriously. Don't get me wrong, I see what they were doing in that it does give him a way to move around and get more involved and communicate, but again, this feels like a shortcut. Instead of being clever with Grogu's powers and showing how he helps in his own unique way in unique circumstances, kind of like a wild card, you just essentially give him a power-up and call it a day. Video game storytelling indeed. Though I do appreciate the slight focus on him as a character, like he's not just a cute MacGuffin, he is a child and he behaves like one. One of my favourite moments from The Mandalorian ever is this little scene where Grogu is pushing buttons. Both pushing buttons on the ship, and pushing the buttons of the adult in his presence, as real children are wont to do. It's cute, it's realistic, and it tells us quite a lot about both the characters in the sense that Grogu feels safe because he is pushing boundaries, and children who don't feel safe among strange adults do not push boundaries. And it also reflects well on Din in the sense that he gives the child a warning, and when he doesn't heed the warning, he doesn't get angry, he doesn't start shouting, he just turns off the buttons, takes the baby away from the danger zone, and just carries on with what he's doing. Patient and effective. So it serves to show that he has some kind of natural ability with children. So at least this felt a bit more like he was an actual child again rather than a puppet who did nothing unless Mando prompted it. And also again, being an auntie, I can just really appreciate this scene. It's kind of like when you come in with a present and the child loves it, but the parent gives you this look just like, you have just made my life 10 times harder. May you rot in hell. Bo asks for volunteers to scout Mandalore, and of course Din goes, but then he says Grogu goes too. Remember when I said that it wasn't great parenting for him to take Grogu in the N1 when they were retaking Navarro? It made sense in the previous season because, aside from Queel, who he trusted implicitly, and they were smart enough to know they needed someone to watch him if they were going to go into battle, it made sense for Din to keep Grogu beside him at all times because there were very few places that it was safe to leave him, even with people he trusted. Now, he's back with his tribe who have children and clearly someone to watch them. No one else is taking their child into battle here. Now, not only do they have caretakers for the kids, but they have a safe planet to leave them on. Every Mandalorian here should be looking at Din Djarin like he is insane and his kid should be removed from his care immediately. I don't care if it's a magical baby, it's still a baby. Anyway, on Mandalore, they meet with some Mandalorians who served Bo-Katan during the war but never left the planet. They basically waited faithfully for her to return all this time. And that narrative tension that should be present is again avoided. That all-powerful hand, or at this point fist of the author, is yet again present. Bo tells them she surrendered and was betrayed, she failed them and left her home. Now, we can sympathise with Bo's decision, that doesn't mean these Mandos will. This should have been a really intense conversation, but everything Bo has done, every mistake she has made is just mentioned, actually most of them aren't even mentioned explicitly, and then glossed over so the writing can trick the audience into thinking they addressed it when in fact they didn't. Once again, I am not against a character who has made so many mistakes and misdeeds, repenting and growing and becoming a great leader because of it. But that is not what they're doing. They have just built up Bo as this great person with these great leadership abilities who, yes, has made some mistakes, but you know, that's in the past. Let's not mention that. It's time to move forward. Once again, I'm not only disappointed that we didn't actually get a season 3 of The Mandalorian, but if this is the whole grand plan of the SCU, we were also kind of denied a Bo-Katan series where she goes on this quest for redemption instead of being handed it. Time?
You have walked both worlds. You were the one who can unite us.
And time.
I return this blade to its rightful owner.
And time again.
We knew you would not forsake us, Lady Bo-Katan.
That planet has been ravaged, plundered, and poisoned. There's nothing left.
We knew you would not forsake us, Lady Bo-Katan.
I am really sad at how much I resent this character now. Because she was actually quite nuanced in the sense that she wasn't like Pre Vizsla who just wanted power. She believed in the warrior way and believed that it was what her people needed. A fundamental political disagreement with her sister. And because of that belief and youthful stubbornness, she replicated her sister's inability to bend and fractured not only her people, but the Death Watch themselves, though a lot of that can be laid at Pre Vizsla's feet for trusting Maul. I really liked in Rebels how she seemed to have been humbled by her mistakes and failures and refuses the sword.
I had my chance to rule and I failed.
But she takes it because she is the only one who has the name, the chops, and the backing to do it, and again, she fails. That is a good character. And I would have been fine if she was left like that, but there is story potential in her redemption. You have to do a lot of work to come back from multiple life-ending, near culture-destroying failures. And it is a tall task for any writer to accomplish, but my god, it could have been epic if they had pulled it off. They didn't even try. Din just gives us a monologue about how great she is, even though what we've seen her do in this season and what he has seen her do are things that most Mandalorians could have accomplished if they weren't intent on making every single Mandalorian around her stupid in order to make her look smarter. And sometimes the accomplishments the show gives her are not even hers. Like when Grogu breaks up the dick measuring contest between Axe and Paz, it is implied in the dialogue he learned it from Bo. In the training sequence, it's clear that Din is talking about the things Grogu learned as a Jedi, but breaking up a fight? Yeah, that's something the Jedi of old did do, but Din doesn't know that, so the only person he could be talking about here is Bo. And once again, it diminishes Din's accomplishments both as a person and a parent because...
You taught your apprentice well.
You didn't learn that from me.
Didn't he?
They raided our village. I defended the town.
Lower your voice.
This was a bad idea.
You're agitating them.
These monsters can't be reasoned with. Sit back down before I put a hole through you. I'm not gonna...
So they carry on to the forge and are ambushed by Gideon's troops, which are wearing Beskar armor. We are shown that the mech suit is not only pointless, but it's a hindrance to Grogu since he could move much faster and with more versatility in his pod, but whatever. And I'm really disappointed that people who were raised in a combat-based education didn't know they were being baited and lured here, but again... gotta make those Mandos stupid to move the plot forward. So Din is captured, and I can't even fathom, like, why was he captured? Why did Gideon take his weapons and then tell his troops to take him away? Why didn't he just kill him? What reason did Gideon have for wanting him alive? So Din is captured and Paz stays behind to give everyone else the chance to escape. He actually manages to take out all the troopers until he is cornered by these guys who I'm going to call Richelieu, Woolsey and Borgia. Just a little Catholic humour there for you guys. Paz is eventually overwhelmed in what is honestly a really great last stand that almost got me to care about something. Maybe I would have felt more if this show were actually focused on Din's relationship with the people in his covert, but again, the show just simply did not give me enough to care that this guy died. Episode 8. I want to make a comment about Mando constantly being saved in this season because I know that is something a lot of people also did take issue with in seasons 1 and 2. But I think Mando not being able to do everything himself brought into focus how human he was. He's not an all-powerful force wielder or an inexplicably unkillable, supposedly ordinary human. I disagree with people that it made his character less badass because even when he failed, the feats he achieved before the failures were impressive, and again, it brought into focus how in a dangerous galaxy like this one, you don't get to think of yourself as invincible. Sometimes you have to just swallow your pride and be sensible.
You need to drop your rifle.
I'm a Mandalorian. Weapons are part of my religion.
Then you are not getting your parts back.
Fine.
I know the lone, amazing, specially special, magnificent, possibly chosen but not always chosen protagonist fulfills our fantasies by kicking any and all ass they come across, and I'm not saying that isn't cool, it is, but it's not the only way to do things. Humans, more often than not, are built to rely on each other. If we lived in this galaxy, no matter how much training we had, we would know the value of making friends and alliances and relying on our fellow man, because there are things in this scary, dangerous galaxy that are simply too big to take on alone. He, and the way this is done in seasons 1 and 2, kind of does a better job at displaying what this season has been shouting in our ears the whole time, and that is that
Mandalorians are stronger together.
People are stronger when they work together. Din may be a withdrawn person and a man of few words, but as I touched upon when I was talking about how annoying it was that his achievements were being taken from him, he is very, very good at making friends and getting people to help, trust, and respect him. There was even speculation by the fans about the finale that people Mando had encountered and helped were going to turn up and assist the Mandalorians because of Din. But that would of course mean that they weren't doing it for Bo, they were doing it for Din, and that would just highlight his qualities in contrast with hers.
This is more than I signed up for.
Regardless, we are taking the ship for the battles ahead. If you want my help, you will help me take this ship.
You're changing the terms of the deal.
Pray I don't alter it any further.
And serve to remind the audience of her repeated failures. And we can't have that, because we are just not ignoring it, but mentioning it and acting like it doesn't matter so we can pretend we've dealt with it and move on. And even in moments that should be humiliating, when he's on his ass knowing he's going to face death, he doesn't give up. He is exhausted, he can barely fight anymore, but he's still going to go out like a warrior. And he has won more than enough fights on his own in those first seasons to prove to the audience that he could do it. He was just smartly selective about the battles he would face alone. In this season, Mando does pretty much nothing but get saved. His highlight of the season is his part in saving Ragnar, and that's as good as it gets. Bo-Katan has to save him from slipping in the bath when he took off his waterproof jetpack for no reason, and no, I already promised, we're not doing that. The amount of times, and some of the manners in which he is saved, serves to give the audience the impression that Din can't do anything on his own. It pisses me off that everything I defended about the first 2 seasons have been amped up to the point where they are now taking away from the show and the character instead of adding to them. The way, the episodic nature of the show, and even Din not being Superman. All those things I vehemently defended the show in regards to, and the show just turns around and spits in my face for it. You feel. I guess you can say the show tied things up, kind of, but again, that just shows how poorly constructed the season is when you think, oh yeah, they set that up 6 episodes ago. Season 1 ended with escaping Gideon with the new goal of finding a Jedi, and Season 2 ended with defeating Gideon and completing the goal of getting Grogu to a Jedi, but with the new question of what Din was going to do next, and was this really the end of Din and Grogu? In this season, there's really nothing to latch onto in regards to The Mandalorian. Oh, we're getting there. And in terms of all the stuff regarding Mandalore and its reclaiming, well, that's another thing we'll save for the conclusion. I think everyone who fell out of love with The Mandalorian because of this season had an episode that was their tipping point. Mine's was 5, but we just kept watching anyway. And I think most of us will probably agree that this season just fizzled out. In conclusion, I am honestly quite saddened by how unenthused I am by the ending. Before this all started, I would have been very interested in a story about the rebuilding of Mandalore and the disparate tribes coming together, but now, I'm just over it. The lack of enthusiasm partially comes from the fact that unless Din was going to be the next Mandalore, this should not have been the plot of his show, and partially from the fact that the bringing together of the tribes was lazy as hell. We have this entire sprawling history of Mandalorians being at each other's throats for millennia, the only things bringing them together being a shared leader, a shared cause, or a shared enemy. The problem being that as soon as that common interest went away, they went right back to ripping each other's throats out. This presents a really interesting writing challenge in that you have got to make it believable that not only are these Mandalorians coming together, but this time they have a reason to put aside their old ways. And no, the reclaiming of their homeworld is not it. Yes, it would be enough to get them to work together short term like Mandos do.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
But the show gave us no reason to believe things are going to be different now other than it says they are. This is the same problem I talked about in episode 5 and how it ruined everything past, present and future because the Armorer just decided that taking off the helmet was okay now, and every single highly devout person was just like, okay, we are just suddenly supposed to believe that just because the Mandalorians are going to start shifting their priorities and become accepting. And I'm not just talking about the Watch Mandos, though they are the most extreme of the bunch. All Mandos have their issues, codes, and traditions they won't let go of. You can have Bo-Katan say,
"But Mandalorians are stronger together."
Mandalorians are stronger together.
Mandalorians are stronger together.
as many times as you want, that is not good enough. It's like being in an argument, in particular in this day and age, an internet argument, where instead of actually arguing, someone just says their conclusion and acts as though they've proven something. This is very much what the writing is like in regard to the reunification of Mandalore. It just tells you its hypothesis and heads straight to the conclusion as if it is in fact right. This was such a waste. I was never a huge fan of Game of Thrones. I never much connected to the characters or the world, but early on the show was a masterclass of television writing. Every action the characters take makes sense, are tied to each other, and affect the world around them and the political system in which they live. And the thing that is a key problem popping up in politics, in fiction and real life is, how do you get people who don't like each other and or don't agree to work together and hopefully overcome differences and reach a level of acceptance? That is not something you can make happen by saying it. That is not something a character can just suddenly realize, let alone a group of characters. They not only took shortcuts, they breezed past anything that may have been interesting about the reclaiming and rebuilding of a society. Your argument may be that they may still do that, but considering what they did with The Way, and a few other things in this season, I am not putting any stock that the writers are going to do anything clever with the Herculean task of bringing together disparate people who don't like each other. I'm not asking the writers to solve the Middle East crisis here, but good freaking grief, give me something! Another reason I don't believe anything good will come out of this is that the writers have given us examples time and time again that when a plot point, theme, or anything else is bothering them, they won't deal with it, they will just breeze past it. They did it with The Way, they did it with Din's redemption, they did it with their freaking main character, but I think the most poignant example is what they did with the darksaber. Now, I want to weigh in on this whole who should be the Mandalore argument and through that address Bo taking over Din's show. I'm a fan too. I get the excitement of seeing characters from the rest of the universe and exploring them. But whether or not that is the case, you do not get to set up a character, get your audience invested in that character, hijack the show to tell another character's story, and expect your audience to be okay with it. As I've said, Bo-Katan regaining Mandalore would have been a very interesting story to tell, but that doesn't mean it was appropriate here. The entire thing about the darksaber in the beginning seemed to be setting up for the audience that this was the next thing that was going to happen to Din. He won the darksaber, he has proven himself not only as a warrior but as someone who can bring people together. And also his struggle with his faith is what opens the door for the question of what is and is not a Mandalorian to be asked. So he, as a character, is the perfect conduit through which to explore that question, and if the goal is reuniting Mandalore, the perfect conduit through which to give an answer. And now he's lost his primary purpose within the show, which was to look after the child, so what's he going to do next? So it felt like giving him the darksaber was the next thing in his story arc. And I don't know if that's where they were going and they just abandoned it, or if they were never going there to begin with and they didn't consider what giving him such an important artifact, culturally significant to him and his people and narratively significant to us, right alongside him losing his only character motivation, was going to imply. You can decide which one of those options is worse. But whatever their intentions were, it was implied to the audience that Din was going to take the darksaber, go forth and reunite his people, and that was going to be his purpose throughout season 3 and perhaps beyond. Because yes, this show is called The Mandalorian. Din Djarin is the Mandalorian. And I don't want to hear that weak argument of, well, the show is called The Mandalorian. It's not called Din Djarin Mandalorian. We don't specify which Mandalorian we're talking about, so we can make anybody the Mandalorian, and it's fine. Just no. Get out of here with that. At this point, you are just arguing semantics. The show has a main character. It is Din Djarin. And let's take shows with titles with a similar ilk, like The Tudors or The Vikings. Both ensemble shows, but still quite clearly have a main character. Imagine it suddenly pivoted towards another person being the main character, not the current main character having their story arc told and someone taking over, a la inheriting the throne or something. No, just suddenly someone else became the main character. Do you think the audiences of those shows would be okay with that? They'd say, no, I thought Henry was the main character. I thought Ragnar was the main character. And it's even worse for The Mandalorian because The Mandalorian isn't even an ensemble show. It's called The Mandalorian. This show has a main character. It is Din Djarin. It looks like John and Dave are trying to do the Marvel thing of creating an expanded universe, but not only is that style on its way out, especially for casual audiences, they're not even doing it right. Even if Marvel blended its stories, each of its movies or TV shows belonged to its character. Falcon made an appearance in Ant-Man, yes, but it didn't suddenly just pivot to telling Falcon's story. The only example you could possibly give an argument with is Captain America Civil War, affectionately among the fandom called Avengers 2.5, and I get why, but even that one still has a main character, and it's still Captain America. Yes, he has to share a lot of the screen with Tony, but Tony is the antagonist of the story, not the villain, the antagonist. And the story progression is still Cap's opposition to him. This isn't that. Bo-Katan is the main character here, plain and simple. Din is barely even a passenger at this point. Now, I'm not against Bo-Katan being the Mandalore. For this extended universe thingy, if that's what they want to do, then fine. She does have previous leadership experience, she comes from a high-powered family, she knows how politics work, she knows how the vast majority of Mandalorian culture works. She is a candidate, okay? There is no reason you can't tell a story about this woman becoming the Mandalore. I would have preferred Din, and switching it now both throws away setup from previous seasons and leaves him flapping in the wind, but it makes sense, and I would be very interested to see it, because she has had her chance to rule several times, but has failed several times. And that would make a really, really interesting story. As I said when talking about episode 7, how do you write someone to come back from that? You could, and you would have to be very talented in order for your audience to know how many times this woman has failed and how many mistakes she's made and how much she really honestly doesn't deserve another chance, but make your audience want to give her one anyway. And if you pull that off, that could be an epic tale. I'm talking Greek epic levels of awesomeness. So I have nothing against the idea of Bo-Katan becoming the Mandalore and a story being written about that. And even if it's garnering an audience you're worried about because The Mandalorian is the show with the wide audience, you could make Bo a secondary character in one of the Mandalorian seasons, explore her a little more. I actually liked the episode The Foundling, like even amongst the wealth of stupidity, that actually did a really decent bit of character work for Bo-Katan, where she was actually feeling accepted, she was following someone else's lead for a change, and it actually felt like she might start to feel comfortable and not be so dismissive of other people's ways and open up. That could have been a very decent start to her realizing what her mistakes were and start working on fixing herself before she starts fixing anything else. But this just fast-tracked that. And I've already said everything I want to say about that, but putting her in the position of main character, because no doubt about it, she was the main character of this season. She's the one who develops, she's the one who grows, she's the one whose relationships we focus on. She is, as the writers put it, the Mandalorian, because we can make anybody the Mandalorian, we can do it, it's fine, it's absolutely fine. And as I said, episode 5 was the one where I, with great thematic appropriateness, lost faith. And that is mostly because they threw away the way, because they didn't want to actually put in the effort of writing people overcoming different creeds. No, they just said, oh, the Armorer said it's okay now because Bo-Katan saw a mythosaur and that means taking off the helmet is okay, even though there is no logical through line to that, but no, it's fine now. It just brings into stark clarity how much of a better narrative choice Din is for uniting people. He has grown until the writers regressed him because they didn't actually want to continue with the arc of his faith being challenged because that would actually have required them to write with some sensitivity and subtlety. Yeah, but up until that point, Din was the one who was growing. He was the one who was meeting people, broadening his understanding of the universe, broadening his understanding of what it means to be Mandalorian. He was the one who was growing, Bo didn't. The only growth she had was the tiny amount in the Foundling where she was trying to respect her fellow Mandalorians' ways, and through that, maybe contemplate her own beliefs. She hasn't actually fixed any of her mistakes. She hasn't done shit. This just serves to prove to me that Din was a far better narrative choice to become the Mandalore unless they were going to do a hell of a lot of work with Bo-Katan's character. So not only have we been denied Din's fully explored redemption story, which was set up both in Season 2 and Book of Boba Fett and heavily advertised that this story was going to be centering Din, but we've also been denied the chance to see Bo-Katan becoming the Mandalore in her own show without the resentment her presence brings for people who come here to see Din and Grogu, i.e. most people. We didn't get to see a story about a woman overcoming so many of her own flaws and failures, and as I said, doesn't really deserve another chance, but feel like we want to give her one anyway. It just served to make me all the more sad that we didn't get a story of Din becoming the Mandalore. I was open to it being someone else if they did a good story, but this just means we didn't get a payoff to season 2. The darksaber's broken, it means nothing now. They just had a key piece of lore and they threw it away like trash. If you have a key piece of lore like that, much like the Way and the different factions fighting each other, you actually have to write it. The almighty hand of the author comes in because your audience knows that trial by combat is a bad way of choosing a leader, so we don't actually have to write a way that the Mandalorians would suddenly not care that Bo has lost the darksaber. Again. You can't just say, you know what, this darksaber trial by combat thing is kind of stupid. Can we just not have it anymore? Can we do that? Can we just not have it anymore because it's kind of hard to write around, so crush it. Just crush the thing because we don't want to deal with it anymore. I really, really don't want to be negative about Star Wars. There is far too much of that out there, but this just completely jerked its audience around. You can tell or start to tell Bo's story without ignoring what your audience actually come to watch the show for, which is The Mandalorian. You can't just say, well, we told you we were building a universe, go watch Clone Wars. Because even if it makes sense without Clone Wars, which I don't believe it does, but even if it did, the weight of these events are completely gone because people who didn't watch the show do not know this woman or the history of Mandalore. And we come to the ever-famous and somewhat insulting expectations argument. And I've spoken up about tempering your expectations before, but for this particular instance, imagine you walk into a steak restaurant and you get lamb put in front of you, and to top it all off, the lamb isn't even that well cooked, but you complain and you call out the chef and quite a few people in the restaurant start berating you and making you feel guilty, saying, you've got lamb in front of you, you've got beautifully cooked lamb, even though it's not beautifully cooked, you've got a beautifully cooked piece of lamb in front of you, you just had the wrong expectations walking into this restaurant. Did I? When it comes to judging art, it is important to judge it by what it is rather than what it isn't. For example, the film Punisher Warzone is, well, it's a grindhouse gore fest, whereas the Punisher TV show is more going towards the political thriller angle. Now, we can argue which of these styles is more suited towards the Punisher, but that is a separate argument. But when it comes to judging them as they are, you can't really go in expecting this one to be too serious. If you accept it for the over-the-top, unapologetic nonsense that it is, you are going to have a better time with it. That is not to say that there aren't problems and there aren't things bad about it. There most definitely are. I would even say it is a overall bad film, but as I said, if you go in with the right expectations, you are going to enjoy it a little bit more if you are into that sort of thing. Sorry, I've been on a major Punisher kick lately. The point is, writers should take their audience's expectations into consideration, whether they want to meet them or have a genuine way they want to subvert them, not just subversion for subversion's sake. But I do also think that audiences should take it upon themselves to temper their expectations lest they miss the good that is there for missing what is not there. So the question is what you're watching good at being what it is? Is Season 3 good at being The Mandalorian? No. And even if we were to say that this is an acceptable hijacking for the sake of this being an extended Star Wars story, well, it's not particularly good at being that either. The laziness displayed in bringing the tribes together almost means there's a certain level of cheek involved in asking us to believe that rebuilding their society isn't going to result in exactly the same problems it did before. The Mandalorians love war so much, I think they would fuck it if they could. I've already gone over this in another video, so don't worry, I'm not going to insert it here because the backstory is interesting but not particularly relevant. The point is that war is a significant part of their culture because they believe that peace equals stagnation and conflict is the creator of progress. And this isn't just me inserting Legends material here. In the show, Bo says this:
Our people have suffered time and again from division and squabbling factions. It is always our own division that destroys us.
So whether or not it's exactly the same cultural reason in canon, it remains that when they don't have anyone else to fight, they will end up fighting amongst themselves. They must always be searching for the strongest and pushing themselves to be stronger. The only thing that brings Mandalorians together are a shared leader, a shared cause, and a shared enemy. If they don't have any of these things, they will inevitably end up fighting each other. So the writers are clearly starting a story about the reunification and rebuilding of Mandalore, so much so that their Merlin character, who always knows what's going on, says it outright. What has changed here? Yes, they are coming together, but they are coming together under a shared leader, for a shared cause, against a shared enemy. What exactly that made them fail the last time and every time before that is suddenly different now? Even the show outright states that nothing has changed.
I hope these two groups get along. They've never met. And what little they know of each other, they hate.
They will if they want to survive.
So yeah, this time I believe it's going to be different. This time, because she saw a freaking mythosaur. And lastly, I want to explore one of the complaints I've heard about The Mandalorian as a whole and say why I think it's actually one of its greatest strengths, and through that answer the question I posed at the start of this video. Why, despite many of the same problems existing in seasons 1 and 2, were they still ultimately audience pleasers among both fans and casual audiences? That is, the episodic, old-fashioned method of television. The Mandalorian was a lone samurai and child story. He was a wandering gunslinger who made his way into town, helped people out with their problems, and moved on. Even in Season 2, which had a lot of fan service, still largely kept to this. Yes, we meet Ahsoka Tano, but he is once again landing on a planet, helping out with a problem that is not his, and going on his way. This works because Ahsoka Tano could be anyone as far as the casual audiences is concerned, and apart from this line,
"Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?"
it is just simply another person with a problem Mando runs into. Even Bo-Katan, who speaks about reclaiming their homeworld, can also just be someone Mando meets and moves on from, but may meet again due to their shared culture and the divisions within it her presence brings up. It is world building small. This is an aspect of the show its detractors say prove it sucks. They say, well, he's just going to this town and talking to this person and helping with this problem and then going away and going to this town and rinse and repeat. What about the Empire stuff? What about the New Republic? What about the Jedi? What about Luke? What they are failing to see is that TV existed before streaming, and much of it Favreau draws from used to look like this. People loved the show because Mando and Grogu could pop into a place or meet a person with a unique problem, we could be told a story, and the story would finish. The Mandalorian was a fun, old-fashioned episodic TV show with fun characters, great visuals, a bit of intrigue, and a structure that allowed for admittedly hit-and-miss stories that you didn't need to invest your freaking soul into. Now, as I said, I'm a fan too. I love the extended universe, but doesn't mean it's good to have for every meal. It doesn't mean it's the only way stories can be told. Now, the best analogy I can give for The Mandalorian in relation to Star Wars is The Hobbit in relation to Lord of the Rings. One is a massive, world-sprawling, mythical story of biblical proportions, and the other one is a fun, whimsical adventure story. So even though they both take place in the same universe, they are fundamentally different properties. And while you can argue that The Lord of the Rings is the superior product because, well, it's, again, like I said, a massive, sprawling biblical epic, I think asking the question is kind of downplaying the importance and value of these simpler stories. Because as we've seen, if you try to turn The Hobbit into The Lord of the Rings, you lose a lot of the original magic. So yeah, that's the best I can say in regards to The Mandalorian. Just let it be what it is. Before The Mandalorian, I had seen and liked Star Wars well enough, but not to the point where I would consider myself a fan. The Mandalorian got me interested in this universe, and my deep dive into it has not stopped since. To see them take away everything that was unique and lovable about it to fit it into this mold of yet another attempt at a movie/TV universe means I'm kinda done with the Star Wars new releases. I'll still occasionally be talking about the old stuff unless something really catches my eye, but considering the current lineup, I don't think that's going to happen. I'll, for this point in time, consider myself done. And I know this is a cliche to end all cliches, but I simply could not put it any better. I'm not even mad. I'm just disappointed.